Time now to take a look through the international papers with our press reviewer, Elena Casas. Hello, Elena. Now, I assume that today Syria is making a lot of headlines.
It's making most of them, yes. The Lebanese paper L'Orient Le Jour goes with the UN accuses Syria of using children as human shields. That report, of course, on the torture apparently of children going on in Syria has added to the UN saying yesterday that Syria is already in a situation of civil war. Now, L'Orient Le Jour says that might invoke a historical precedent. If you look, for example, at Kosovo 20 years ago in the 1990s, the NATO troops did intervene without there being a UN resolution passed. It was passed after the fact. So they're saying that perhaps this will now give justification, at least in a law or in a theoretical situation, for foreign intervention. The problem, though, is there's still really no appetite in governments for doing this. They're still insisting on the Kofi Annan plan, despite this seeming to have failed really weeks ago, if not months ago, as Assad has done nothing to try and implement any of its 6 clauses. The Guardian headlines on Russians have been selling attack helicopters to Annan, so it seems that some foreign nations are intervening already, perhaps not in quite the way that those worrying about human rights in Syria would like, but it seems, as Hillary Clinton said yesterday, The Guardian says they too have seen intelligence documents that make it look clear. It seems there's evidence that those are Russian attack helicopters being amassed by the Syrian army. They say there's evidence, or at least evidence to back up a fairly concrete fear that they might be used in another massacre and that troops might be massacring around Aleppo there in Syria. The Independent has headlined on the Gulf nations supplying the Free Syrian army and other opposition leaders with weapons. They say that these are weapons then coming originally from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, shipments of mortars and grenades and machine guns that they say are then being passed via Turkey to opposition leaders, particularly those linked to the Muslim Brotherhood and more Islamist groups, which of course raises fears of this becoming more of a sectarian conflict, although the Independent does point out that maybe some opposition groups are, if you like, acting more religious than actually they are in order to get those funding and weapons from Gulf states.
Now, you mentioned Russia earlier, and on the domestic level, they're having to deal with growing opposition.
Yes, the rallies defy threats of fines and rain to come out of protests, says the front page of the Moscow Times. These, of course, are the tens of thousands of people who took to the streets in Moscow, despite the threats of heavy fines, despite the fact that the secret police went around and called in a number of opposition activists for questioning and searched a number of their houses, broke into their houses, sawed through some doors, the newspaper says, and ransacked the homes of opposition activists. The number one Twitter hashtag yesterday in Russia, the Moscow Times says, was Hello 1937, people making direct comparisons between Putin and Stalin. And they say perhaps that's not as exaggerated as it might seem, because the secret police haven't been so active in Russia at any time since the fall of the Soviet Union. El País, though, is asking the Spanish paper in its editorial, what is Vladimir Putin so afraid of? All of these clampdown tactics are just making people more likely to join the increasingly vocal, increasingly popular protest movement. But for him, he's not really seeing it as a sort of opposition force that could ever be negotiated with. He seems to see it, they say, as a cross between a terrorist attack and a natural disaster. That is to say, something that certainly can't be talked around.
Now, Russia's also under fire from a completely different angle, and that's Polish football supporters.
Yes, lots of anger in the Polish press today. One article in Gazeta Wyborcza I've picked out. They're furious because Russian fans, some of whom were arrested last night in Warsaw before the Russian-Polish match, had nationalistic barriers which evoked very still painful memories in Poland of the Second World War. The paper points out that some in Poland still believe that a Russian plot was responsible for the plane crash that killed Poland's president and a lot of his ministers just 2 years ago, and there's nothing, that incident last night did nothing to diminish the amount of nationalist anger between the two countries. Some more positive sporting news also in The Guardian. They've got details of Danny Boyle's Olympic opening ceremony, which apparently is going to involve maypole dancers.
The film director.
Yes, the film director, the Trainspotting director, is directing that opening ceremony, and it apparently involves maypole dancers, real sheep, a real farm, and a recreation apparently of the Glastonbury Festival mosh pit, which really won't mean much to people outside the UK. But apparently he's picked that out as one of Britain's greatest cultural treasures that the world needs to be shared with, apparently.
I look forward to seeing that then in a few weeks' time. Thank you very much, Elena, for running us through the international newspapers.